Hi there, my name is Jessica Ream Hall. I'm one of the local artists in residence with BreckCreate. Now typically my open studio hours are on Sundays from 3:30 to 6:30, but today I'm coming to you from my home studio to teach you a little bookbinding class. Now, this is a very basic journal, very simple, not overly complicated, so don't be kind of concerned about the idea of bookbinding or making a book, because that can sound very difficult or very complicated, but I promise this one is not. So let's go over the things that you are going to need for today's project. First off, you're going to need something for your cover. I am using an old album cover, so it's a thicker, sturdier paper. If you don't have an old album cover, that's fine. Look around your house and see what you do have. Maybe you glued together a couple pages from your favorite magazine that has pretty fascinating images on the front. Maybe you have an old folder from school or work that's heavier, thicker, that's going to make a nice, sturdy cover. Maybe you have some old cardstock. Maybe you have an old book that you want to take the cover of and fold in half, something a little thinner, not like a hardbound book. So look around your house. Feel free to get creative. The more creative, the better. Typically, the more unique the book comes out and the more lovely it is. In addition to something for your cover, you're going to need a pencil or something to make marks with for cutting out. So that could be a pen, marker. I like a pencil because I can always erase the lines. Totally up to you though. In addition, you're going to need an X-Acto blade or something to cut with. Now, if you don't have an X-Acto blade, if you have a box cutter, that works. Just be very, very careful and make sure if you're a kid, make sure your parents helping you with this because it's really easy to slice your fingers with. Done it too many times. If you don't have an X-Acto blade, that's okay too. You can use scissors. Those work. Again, remember they're sharp, so be very careful with those. Have your mom or dad around if you are using them and you are a kid. You need an awl. So this is a pointy object that's used to poke holes in things. If you don't have an awl, don't worry. There is another option for you. So don't freak out or stress if you don't have that ability to have one of these. You can always use a needle instead, in fact. So that you're going to need a bone folder. Now, traditionally, these were actually made out of bone. A lot of the ones today are acrylic. Sometimes you can still get some that are made from bones, but most of them are acrylic. Again, if you don't have a bone folder, don't worry. You can still do this project. You can either just use your fingers to make a nice crease, but if you want to get that really sharp, nice crease that a lot of bookbinders look for, you can use an old spoon. You can use an old butter knife. Just again, be careful with the blade. We don't want to slice or get hurt here. You could even use, if you have a ruler, you can even use that flat end of the ruler to flatten out the pages. Speaking of which, you will need a ruler. You will also need a flat edge. Now, my flat edge is also a ruler. I prefer to use this one because it allows me, it has a thicker side, so it kind of protects my fingers as I cut along the edge there. If you don't have something like this that's a straight edge, you can use an old book. You can use an old piece of wood that you might have laying around the garage. You can use, oh goodness, you can get really creative. So kind of look around anything that has a durable, hard, straight line that is going to allow you to cut against. Feel free to use it. So again, look around. Maybe an old cutting board even from your kitchen, an old book. Yeah, look around, see what you have. You're also gonna need something to actually bind your book together with. Now, if you only have this really thin thread, feel free to use it. Well, maybe just double it over a couple times to make it thicker. Ideally, you're going to want something thicker, more along the lines of the thickness of like DMC floss or cross-stitching floss, or maybe yarn. The one catch is you're going to want to make sure whatever you're using for your binding material, that it's going to fit into your needle that you're using. Ideally, you're going to want a needle that's going to have a thicker eye, something more like a cross-stitching needle. But again, see what you have. Pull from whatever you do have it. You can make it work, I promise. So, in addition to all the supplies and the cover, you're obviously going to want the pages inside, or what we like to call signatures. In bookbinding terms, a signature is just that folded paper that's inside and it creates the two individual pages. So for instance, this one was made using about 10 to 15 signatures, and you can see they're folded in half and then attached to the cover. So you can, again, maybe you have scrap paper. I have some leftover paper from other projects, so I'm going to be using this just to recycle it. Otherwise, if you don't have craft paper, that's okay. You can use just your standard computer paper. You can get creative. Maybe you pull out a bunch of really pretty pictures from magazines and you make it more of a collage style book more than maybe a journal, or maybe you write on the pages with a marker and turn each page into a mini piece of art. So get creative, have fun, go look around your house, see what you can find, and then we'll get started. All right, so now that we have all of our materials, let's get started. So to begin with, we're gonna wanna cut our cover. So if you have a folder where there's kind of two pieces and you need to cut apart at the seam, just very gently take your scissors and cut so you only have one side of your folder. Otherwise, if you have your heavy cardstock or old pages from a magazine, you don't have to worry about any of that. So your next step is we're going to decide what size book we want or journal we want. Now the example I showed you earlier, it's 3.5 by 5. However, that cover, and that's the first part we're going to cut our cover out first, is actually twice as wide as when it's folded because it's one big piece, all right? So for this piece, it's 5 tall, but 7 wide, since this part here is 3.5. So if this is going to be the outside of your cover that you want to use, you don't want to mark on this side. You don't want to see any pencil marks. So we're going to flip it onto the other side. Using our ruler, we're going to decide how tall we want our book to begin with. So I think I'm going to go with 5.5. I'm going to make a mark at 5.5. I'm going to flip it around so it's the opposite side that we're measuring and measure out 5.5 again. Now, you can either use your ruler, lining up those 2 tick marks, make a line with your pencil and cut with your scissors, or if you have an X-Acto knife, and the way I prefer to do it, you can use your straight edge, line up the 2 marks, grab your X-Acto blade, holding it like a pencil, not like you're trying to stab something, not like your hand's upside down, but holding it like it's a pencil so you have a lot of control over that blade. Your opposite hand's going to hold the straight edge. Now you want to press down firmly onto that straight edge, but keep your hands or your fingers out of the way of where the blade is. Now when we cut, we're also going to be pulling this kind of towards ourselves. So we want to make sure our body's on the other side of the X-Acto blade, or on the other side of the straight edge, so we don't accidentally catch our hip, our stomach, or our shirt. Okay, so just a little safety there. Now you don't have to press really hard. You're not going to try and cut this all the way through on one time or one fell swoop. You kind of want to use a lighter pressure so you constantly are just going up and down, or pulling it in one direction, I should say, but you're kind of repeating that cut multiple times until it comes away. It's going to give you a nice straight cut. It's going to keep the blade from breaking, and it's going to protect your hands so your hands don't get nice and tired, okay? Next, we are going to measure out the width. So I want mine to be a square. So if the top is 5.5, then the cover, when folded, should be 5.5 wide. So the whole piece, that whole wide piece that's going to be folded in half like this, is going to be 11. So starting at one end, I'm going to measure out 11 inches. I'm going to flip it around and measure out 11 inches. Again, you can use your scissors, draw a line, cut, or using your straight edge and X-Acto knife, holding it like a pencil. Other hand is nice and tucked out of the way, but holding that straight edge firmly. And gently make some marks, like so. All right, next step, so we want the fold, and since this is thicker, it's gonna be a little more difficult to fold nice and smoothly. So we're gonna make a couple score lines. To do that, we're gonna find the center of our cover, 5.5, flip it around, find that center, make a mark. All right, and since I'm just gonna get a couple really shallow little score line. So a score line is just a very shallow cut. I'm not going to go all the way through the cover. It's just a little bit so it's easier to fold and kind of guides the fold. Since I'm just doing that, I'm just going to use my ruler. I'm even using less pressure on the X-Acto blade as I kind of draw it down a few times. All right, set that aside. And then we're going to very gently fold on that score line, lining up those 2 folds. So we have the fold there, fold there. All right. Now, if you didn't have an X-Acto knife and you couldn't make those score lines, another thing you can do is you can use your ruler, line up those 2 marks, whatever is the opposite side. So the side that's not under the ruler, you're just going to slide your hand underneath there and then slowly start to kind of lift that page up and fold it over. Okay? Then, using the X-Acto, or not the X-Acto knife, I'm sorry, using your bone folder or your knife, your butter knife, so it's going to have a dull edge, or your spoon, or something else that's kind of is easy to press into the paper to make a nice solid crease. You're going to run that down this crease a couple times just to make sure that crease is nice and firm. Okay? So we'll set that aside. Next, we're going to cut our pages. So there's a couple options for our pages. You can either tear them, which creates this nice little beveled edge that you might be able to see here from a project before where it was torn instead of cut. Or you can cut with either your X-Acto knife or your scissors. And just like the cover, we're going to cut the pages exactly the same. So we'll start with the height. And I am actually going to cut mine instead of tearing them. If you're interested in tearing though, I will show you how that is done. So using this little scrap, let's say we wanted to tear this in half. So we'll make a mark at 2.5 and 2.5. What you would do is you would take your ruler, you would line up those 2 marks just like we did when we cut the cover. And now you want the ruler to sit on the part of the paper you want to keep. It just keeps it protected. Make sure the tear doesn't go kind of off to one side or get a little wiggly. It just protects that one side, okay? So holding it with one hand, you're going to grab that corner in the other. Now I'm right-handed, so I'm kind of doing this where my right hand is dominant. If you're left-handed, it would probably be flipped and you'd be tearing this way, okay? It just depends on what makes you more comfortable. So holding it down, you're going to lift the exposed side and you're going to start to pull it towards the ruler and down. So you start to use that edge of your ruler or your straight edge to be almost like a knife, and it tears the paper. Okay? That's how you tear it if you prefer tearing. Either one's fine. Tearing is what I prefer to do usually, but this paper that I'm using, since it's scrap and left over from another project, it's just a little too, I'm not going to have enough to really hold on to clearly tear it. You do want about 1 inch, so it's easier to tear. If you're trying to tear just like 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch, it gets kind of difficult. So I'm going to be cutting mine today. So if you're cutting yours, you can cut a couple pieces all at once. If you are tearing, you are going to need to tear them one at a time to make sure they all stay the same. So since I am going to be cutting, I can cut all of these together, which makes it pretty nice. So I'm going to start with my height. So mine was 5.5 inches tall. Make sure that's all nice and level. So I can cut that exactly at 5.5. Now again, you want to measure twice and cut once. So I'm going to take the cover and I'm just going to make sure, yep, that is correct. That is the same. Just as before, I'm going to line up those 2 marks with my straight edge, holding my X-Acto knife like a pencil. Very carefully, just start to run or pull that blade down the length of the straight edge, making sure my fingers that are holding the straight edge are not getting in the way. Since I'm cutting multiple pieces at once, I'm going to start to see those couple top pieces start to pull away, so I'll move them out of the way. And I'll keep cutting a few more times until I'm all the way through the stack. Now, cutting the width of the pages is going to be a little different because as the pages fold and they stack in or pocket in on each other, they're going to start to kind of slope out just because they start to push that inside piece out a little bit. And I kind of don't want too much of that coming outside of the cover. I don't want it to look like this when I'm done. So I'm going to double measure just to make sure. I'm going to measure that again, and that is 11 inches. So I'm going to take 1/4 inch off. So that should allow that extra kind of space for as the pages expand out. So starting on one side, I'm going to measure 10 3/4 because it was 11 inches. Take 1/4 inch off, 10 3/4. Flip it around. Do the same thing on the other side. 10 3/4. right, stacking up my paper again, making sure it's all in line, moving any scraps out of the way just so they don't clog everything up. I'm going to lay the ruler again so that my ruler rests on the side of the paper that I want to keep. So this is what I'm going to use. This is going to be my scraps. So I'm going to line up the ruler or my straight edge, whatever you might have. Hands out of the way, but holding it nice and sturdy. Holding my X-Acto blade like a pencil. And just allowing myself to pull this down a couple times to make those cuts that are needed. Not trying to push too hard and make my hand tired or hurt or break the blade. So we'll set those off to the side. Might be able to use those again for another project or a smaller book. All right, so I have my pages just like I did before. With my cover, I'm gonna fold in the same way. But first I'm gonna just double check again, make sure this all fits inside. So you'll see a little space where it's not quite the same on either side. That's okay. We want that for the pages or the signatures. So in bookbinding terms, the pages are called signatures. This is the cover, all right? So just like I did with the book, I don't have to score it because the paper is a little thinner. It's easier to fold. I'm gonna fold mine so the short ends come to meet. All right. I like to do mine kind of assembly line style, so I'll fold all of mine first. And then I'll use the bone folder to make sure that crease is nice and crisp. Now don't forget, if you are still tearing your pages, you can always hit pause on this and then come back and join us once you have all your pages torn. All right, so using the X-Acto blade, the bone folder, which sometimes these look different. I have two different shaped ones. I like them for different reasons and doing different things. So I guess I'm using the straight one today, and I'm using that kind of beveled edge here to make a nice sharp crease. If you don't have a bone folder, again, you can use your ruler. You can use a spoon. You can use like the dull flat edge of a butter knife maybe. So you kind of see what you have around your house again. And if you don't have any of those, just use your fingers to try, like your fingernails, and just try to make that nice crease, sharp crease. Now, I only have 5 signatures, and that's okay. My paper's thicker, so I don't want too many signatures. If your paper's thinner, you could have maybe up to 10, 20 signatures, just depending on how thick that paper is. If it's too thick, or if it's thicker, if you get too many, it's gonna start to lose that tightness around the spine. So just something to keep in mind. All right, so then we're gonna stack the signatures inside one another. So then when we open them up, they're all in alignment with one another. Okay, so here's the next part. This is the fun part where we start to actually put all of it together. So keeping those folds nice and tight together, we're gonna take our awl, A-W-L, not A-L-L. Now this is a sharp pointed instrument to poke holes into material. So be very careful with this end if you have one. We don't wanna poke our hand or our fingers or something we shouldn't be poking. If you are working on something else other than a cutting board like I am, you might want to grab maybe some scraps from your envelope, from your material that you made a cover with if it's thicker, or maybe grab like a piece of old cardboard and set it underneath. That way you don't accidentally cut into or push into the table beneath you, just to protect your working surface. Now, you can either get real technical and measure it all out so it's all even spaces between the holes, or you can just freehand it. I'm going to freehand mine today. I like how the freehanded aspect looks. You're going to put 3 holes in your journal today. Now, you don't want to go all the way to the end because it'll rip out the top. So you want to leave about 1/2 inch from the edge to where that first hole is on the spine. All right. You can do these really far apart. You can do them closer together. Now, you don't want them super close in the center or the book's not going to stay super stable. So it kind of helps to have them at least a little space between the top and the bottom hole. I'm going to do mine somewhat similar. I'm actually going to bring that bottom hole in just a little, just to make it little different. And then you're going to put one right in the center. It can be even in the center, or it can be off to one side, all up to you. I think I'm going to do mine off to one side a little bit, and I want it off to one side where this is going to be the top. So I'm going to poke that hole there. All right. Now, since these were all put together really tight and that crease or that fold was nice and tight stacked on top of the others, those holes went all the way through. Now, if you don't have it all, that's okay. You can use your needle, actually, in fact. It's going to be a little more tricky, but you can still use it. And instead of doing the whole stack at once, you'll do one at a time. But that first one that you do will then become the template for the others. So you'll poke the holes in that first one, then you'll grab your next page, you'll stack them together, and you'll poke through the hole in that template so that it lines up, or the holes in the second one line up with the first. And then you'll continue that all the way through. Now, once you get all the pages pre-poked with holes, you're going to then poke the holes in the cover. And just like if you were using your needle and you were using one as a template to punch the holes in the other, you're going to line up that one template page on the inside, making sure the fold of the page or the signature lines up with the fold of the cover, okay? I'm going to use my awl, and I'm going to stick it in the hole at the top and then press all the way through so it goes through to the cover. And then I'm going to find the second one, do the same, and the third. All right, so the awl is finished. We can set that aside. That's all you needed it for. Then we're going to reline up all the pages and set them into the inside of the book. All right, set this aside just for a moment. Now we're going to grab our thread. This is what we're going to actually use to sew the book together with. Now, if you are using regular sewing thread, it's a little thinner, you're going to probably want to double it over so that it's thicker. Just holds a little stronger. Ideally, if you have anything like a thicker yarn or cross-stitching floss or thread, I would recommend using that. All right, so to find the amount that you need, again, you don't want to run out. You don't want to have too little. That's a pain in the butt to then re-sew it all together. So we are going to measure out the length of the spine. So we're going to do one length and then grab. So the hand that was holding the tail, the very raw end of the thread, we're going to move over, grab the thread from the other hand and pull it that same length again of the spine and then trim it off there. Okay. A couple ways to thread your needle. You can always just lick the end, stick it into the eye of the needle. That's fine too. If that gets too difficult or if it's not wanting to work, you're going to hold one end of the thread between your pointer and middle finger, and then the other side between your thumb and your ring. So you kind of have this bridge of thread. You take the needle in the opposite hand, bring it underneath the thread, and then pull up. So you see it loops around the needle. Using the pointer finger of the hand, holding the needle, you're going to press it onto the top just so the thread doesn't slide off. Then using your pointer and thumb of the other hand, you're going to hold on around the thread and the needle. All right, so you're pinching really hard. So it's starting to pinch that thread in half, kind of. A hand that was originally holding the needle is going to grab the needle again. Gently pull against the thread and then slide the needle out, okay? And then you're going to slowly start to kind of roll the fingers open, just so you just a little bit of that thread poking out. And you're going to take the eye of the needle, and you're going to press that folded thread through the eye of the needle until it looks like that, and then just pull it through. All right, so you don't want to pull it so that the thread is even, but you want one side to be a little shorter than the other. That's going to give you the maximum amount of thread to kind of work with. Okay, so we're starting from the outside. I'm going to actually thread this through the outside of the cover without the pages there just yet. All right, so stick the needle into that middle hole. We're going for the middle hole. That's where we're going to start, okay? And then pull it all the way through, but we don't want to pull that thread all the way through. We want to have a nice little tail. That's what we're going to use to close it off at the very end, all right? And then we are going to grab our pages, and one at a time, unless your hole stayed perfectly lined up, you're going to start to push the needle through the second hole. And you see how the pages fold in? We want the needle to go from the outside in, so it comes out on the inside of that fold, okay? Now, once you get this first hole sewn through, usually the other holes will kind of line up a little easier. If not, you can do it this way each time. All right. So, holding on to that tail outside of the spine, we're gonna just pull, just make sure there's no slack hidden in between the pages, okay? All right. So next you can go either into the top hole or the bottom hole, doesn't matter. We're gonna come through all the holes at the end of the day. I'm gonna go to this one first, just because. So I'm gonna take my needle, I'm gonna thread it through the pages, which are now lined up a little easier. And then I'm gonna find that hole on the inside of the cover and poke the needle through, pull it all the way. I'm gonna turn it over so I see all of it on this side. Hold on to that tail again and then pull on that thread until it's nice and taut. But we don't want this original tail to slip out. All right, we have this last one to do. So we're gonna go from the outside in from the cover. So starting with the cover, punch the needle through that hole, find the holes in the signatures as well. Now this one's getting a little more difficult, so I'm gonna have to put them on one at a time. There's one, oop, that got two. There we go, until the needle comes all the way through the cover and the signatures to the inside of the book. Making sure you're holding on to that tail from the very beginning. Pull nice and tight on the part that you just sewed through, just to make sure there's no slack in between the pages. And then last, we're going to go back in that hole that we started with, but we're going inside the book to outside. All right, stick the needle through, come out on the other side. Perfect. Now we can set our needle aside. We're done with that. Now, if you had sewn this out or sewn this through and both pieces of the thread were on one side of this spine, we're just gonna tuck one underneath, all right? That way when you tie the knot, you're tying over this center piece of thread. So, and then you're just gonna make a basic square knot or double knot right over the top of that center spine. All right, then trim these little tail pieces as long or as short as you like. We'll keep those there. It kind of adds a nice little decorative touch to the spine. And then you'll just fold it closed, and then there you go. There is your finished book. Well, thanks again for tuning in for our little bookmaking tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. I would love to see photos of all of the journals that you created. So please definitely take photos and send them over. And yeah, these are great little, I kind of think of my journals as sacred, like sacred spaces that I can take with me. And so it's a nice safe place where I can sit and journal or write out my thoughts or kind of work out what's going on in my head and my heart for that day. So use this as a time for that. Kind of dive a little deeper and give yourself the permission and freedom to kind of write out whatever's going on. Or if you're more of a drawing person and you prefer to draw over writing, maybe you start to use this as a safe place to sketch out ideas for new projects, or just to keep a visual journal of your day to day, or whatever kind of creativity might be sparked by this little journal here. So know that we have a lot of other great offerings on our website with BreckCreate. So head over to breckcreate.org to tune in and check out and see all the different other tutorials that we're offering and classes that we're offering online during this time. And of course, we're looking forward to the day when we can open our doors again and open our studios and see all of you in there with your smiling faces and create in person with you, not just online. But until that happens, until we're able to, please continue to check back, see the other classes, see what the other teachers are offering, the other artists on campus, what they might be offering for you, and enjoy the ability to still create from home. So until next time, thank you so much. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay healthy, stay safe. And again, tune into breckcreate.org to see what other classes we're offering. And yeah, have a great rest of your day.